The next step in the process is to cut the legs out of the 8/4 stock, and the dimension is roughly 44 millimeters, or 1 inch and 5/8 roughly. So I'm using the parallel guides, and these work exceptionally well. I have because of the U channel here, you have to account for that, so I've just raised everything up on some blocks that I've secured with the clamping elements underneath. And then I've got a clamp here to secure the U channel to the table so that everything doesn't move. One thing to account for when you're using the parallel guides to cut the short side of the stock is you need to account for the thickness of the blade curve. So if you measured your exact width here and you don't account for the curve of the blade, the 2.4 millimeters or the 2.5 millimeters, then your stock's going to be off. So I set that, making sure I took that into account. And then one thing I also like to use on these pointers is I actually use a razor blade to put inside the groove here, and it helps me line up the pointer and the scale so it's exact on both ends. And once these things are calibrated, you can get very, very accurate cuts with it. Okay, I'm ready to make the cut. Got the depth set properly, double checked all my measurements. I mark an F on the front of this to mark the face so that when I cut the pieces out I'll be able to keep the orientation. In fact, I'll put a number there too so that I know which order I took them off in. I'm going to make the cut with the 75, and you'll see that the saw is able to go through here pretty easily, but you will hear the bearings kick in, the MMC electronics, and you'll hear how the saw responds to cutting through the thick hardwood. That's a perfect cut. Very little blade marks, no burning at all. This will just take a little bit of light sanding to make it perfect. Very happy with it. Okay, I set up for the next cut, denoted F2 on the face for the second piece that I'm cutting, and I took the off cut and put it on the left-hand side of the guide rail for more support. And incidentally, I did check the accuracy of the setup, and it was spot on. So it's one square piece that's 44 millimeters by 44 millimeters. So we'll go ahead and make the cut. Again, another gorgeous cut. Checking for square, spot on. So I'll keep doing that for all the pieces of the legs. Yeah, the 75 saw is awesome for this application. Doesn't bog down, makes a smooth cut. and it's the perfect tool for ripping thick hardwood like this 8/4 walnut. So there you have 4 uniform square pieces right from the same stock. So now what I'll do is I'll look at these for grain orientation and see what's the most pleasing, and I'll put them in a square configuration. I'll line them all up square. However I decide to ultimately do it, then what I usually do is I'll draw a square around here, and that way I'll always know the orientation of the pieces, and I'll figure out which side is going to be my front and back and which sides are going to be outward facing on all 4 pieces. I'm not afraid to move the stock around. I look for grain. I want the grain to match as best as possible, so I'll play around with this for a little while and just see what looks really pleasing to the eye and then mark it out that way. And then once that's done, I'll cut everything to final length, and then these pieces will be ready for the joinery. While I have the parallel guide set up, I'm going to go ahead and dimension the rest of the stock for the stretchers and get those all uniform, and then I'll be able to start on the joinery. Okay, I set up the cuts for the stretchers, and it's 115 millimeters basically for the width of the sides, the rails and stiles for the stretchers. I double check everything, so I just take a rule, butt it up against the side of the guide rail strip, and just make sure that the distance between the edge of the guide rail strip and the edge of my stock is the same on both pieces. And it is. If I measure to the guide rail to the edge of the stock, it's 118 millimeters, so that accounts for the thickness of the blade. So I'll go ahead and make these cuts. I've got extra material supporting the guide rail on the back side as well, and that gives me plenty of stability. I also noticed when I was clamping the thicker stock, the 8/4 stock that I was cutting a minute ago, that when I clamped down on the channel, it kind of bowed the rail a little bit, and I had to push down on it. So to compensate for that, what I did is I just added a little block of wood underneath here between the bottom of the channel and the top of the MFT, and then clamped to that, and it seems to work out quite nicely. So the next step is to readjust the cutting deck to my saw and go ahead and make these cuts. There's one. And this is the piece that isn't quite the same thickness. You can see by the white marks left from when I was cleaning. There's a little bit of twist in here, so I'll still be able to use this piece, but I'll use it on the inside of the table for some drawer mirrors. Okay, I've repositioned parallel guides in to accommodate the shorter length of stock, and I'm ready to make the cut. will be the side stretchers. I'm going to cut it in half at the right distance, and that'll be both the side stretchers. While I had everything set up, I decided to actually make a few more pieces that were the same width, and that way if I make a mistake on the side stretchers, I'll have some extra material. These pieces are actually going to be used on the inside of the table as part of the drawer runner assembly, so I'll cut them to the width now, and then if I need to adjust the width a little bit later I can go back and do so, but that way I'll always have some extra pieces that are the same size and I won't have to go back and try to match everything in a later stage. So I'll go ahead and make a few more cuts now to get the extra pieces, and then I'll rip the other side of the tabletop and get ready to glue up that.